This is the Extra Point Podcast. During this podcast, we will dive deeper into our Sunday teaching and share practical next steps for your faith journey. Now, let's kick off the Extra Point.
Hey, welcome to the Extra Point. I'm Cheryl Ross, the Next Steps and Discipleship Pastor here at Southridge Church, and I'm with Scott Beha, our lead pastor. And before we dive any deeper, I want to make sure that if you haven't liked or subscribed to this podcast, that you go ahead and do so. That way you don't miss out on any new content. So, Pastor Scott, we've been in the Rise and Fall series. We only have a couple more weeks left of it. But this passage from 1 Samuel is a bit interesting. It's one of those that if you actually read through, you're probably like, what is going on here? Yeah. But you talked about how in this passage, Saul is doing something that he had actually banned. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to get into a lot of that type of stuff in regards to like Halloween and all that here in a minute. But your main point was that, God's word stands. And the best thing that we can do is to kneel beneath it. Yeah. Saul didn't like the answers he was hearing, so he went to other things for it. And that's something that I believe, was a problem with the Israelites all throughout history. Yeah. And for us today, we often want to go to all these different created things for looking for answers, looking for fulfillment, looking for those things that we want, when really we should just be going to the Creator. So, Pastor Scott, if you don't care to just dive in a little bit, let us know kind of some of the basics from your sermon, a little overview. So that way, if you didn't hear it, you really should go back and listen to it. But this will give you some context for today.
Yeah, so essentially I think Saul was doing something that probably every kid, probably every adult too, has done. Mm-hmm. And that's whenever we get an answer that we do not like, we go and try to find a different answer somewhere else. Right, I talked about how my kids, when they got home Saturday, they wanted to go have a sleepover with their cousins. So they asked their mom, they asked Megan. She didn't give them the answer they liked, and so I heard both of them go, let's go ask Dad. And it was like, yeah, we all kind of have that tendency to do that in our life. And sometimes a second opinion is not a bad thing. But when it comes to stuff like that, whenever the authority over you is already spoken, mm-hmm. there's not really a second answer coming. And so for Saul, he'd been rejected. God was no longer speaking to him. The answer was pretty clear. Mm-hmm. The battle lines were being drawn between the Philistines and Israelites. The answer was already pretty clear. He just didn't like the answer. And honestly, I think that's what we see a lot with Christians nowadays, mm-hmm. is a lot of the things that we say that we have questions about or whatnot, the answer is already pretty clear. We just mm-hmm. really don't like the answer.
Right.
When you see Christians kind of falling off the deep end on some pretty, Bible basic topics, mainly because they're tied to it politically mm-hmm. or whatever it might be, you go, you're just kind of missing the pretty plain truth on purpose because mm-hmm. you just don't. I wish more people would just be honest mm-hmm. and go, here's the truth about why I changed my belief or my stance, mm-hmm. is I just don't like what God actually said.
Yeah.
And not, I think God changed his mind or tried. No. Just be honest. You don't like what he said, so therefore you've decided to take a contrary stance to that. Mm-hmm. And that's your prerogative, mm-hmm. but it's not the prerogative or even an option for someone that calls himself a Christian. Mm-hmm. God's word stands. Mm-hmm. All you can do is choose to kneel beneath it. You cannot change it. You cannot edit it. You cannot sidestep it and wish that it were different. Right. His word stands. The best thing you can do is kneel beneath it. And that's what Saul's doing. That's the mistake. That's how he's going to end up at the Witch of Endor, is he didn't like what God had to say. Mm-hmm. So he went and sought a medium to bring Samuel back. And I love the story because Samuel goes, yeah, the answer's still the same. It's kind of like if my kids, who didn't end up coming and asking me, because they knew how that was going to, we've gone over that enough in our house. Yeah. They knew that they didn't, but if they did, I would have said, no, what did your mom say? Mm-hmm. She said no. All right, then I also say the answer is still the same. Mm-hmm. The answer's not going to change. In this case, it's just not going to. And the answer, whatever it is that you've been fighting against God with, I don't really think that's a big deal, or there's no way a book written all those years ago could be talking about, these modern problems that were, it's like, no, listen. We try to do all kinds of gymnastics to flip and dive over the very simple truths of the Scriptures, and that's just not an option for those of us that are serious about our faith.
Yeah, absolutely. So now I know that there was a lot of questions, a few questions that we had come in about these kind of things, because Saul had actually banned the practice of going to see mediums and those types of things. And so you dove in a little bit about this on Sunday. However, we want to get into it more because there is a lot of like this new age stuff, a lot of these Christians who do use some of these things or think that this is okay. So let's dive in to that, and even in regards to Halloween, and what that looks like for trick-or-treating, trunk-or-treats that churches put on, we put on ourselves. What does that look like for somebody who is serious about their faith?
Yeah, and I'll say, we think that this is a new problem to, right now what you're seeing in a lot of churches and a lot of Christians is the marrying of New Age practices with Christianity. This is actually not a new issue at all. When Paul went and spoke at the Areopagus, and he looked around, he said, man, I see all of your different gods that you all have, but you also have an unknown God. He was dealing with the sort of pagan society that they would accept the truth of a new religion or the truth of a new God and just add it on to what they were already doing. So this has been happening literally for 2,000 years. What people are doing in regards to trying to marry New Age philosophy and practices with Orthodox Christianity has been going on for 2,000 years. My point Sunday was this is not an option, and the reason why it's not an option is not just because, we just think that those are things that you should stay away from. No, it's theologically based. The reason why in the Scriptures there is a forbidding on things like witchcraft, sorcery, mediums, necromancers, any of that sort of practices of the occult or New Age practices, the reason why has to do with all of that centers in and around doing some part of the created order being able to be manipulated in a way that it can force an unmovable God to act in certain situations however they want, right? The reason why you're lighting candles in a seance and repeating certain phrases is because you think that you can somehow create the supernatural by manipulating certain things like that. That undermines the sovereignty, the what we believe in the Christian church about the sovereignty of God, which is God does as he pleases. Yeah. You cannot force him to act in a certain way. Oh, I'm going to curse this person, or I'm going to try to bless this person through, these different things that they get into, or I'm going to wear this crystal around my neck because I think that's going to bring... No. Listen, God does as he sees fit. Not the rabbit's foot in your pocket or the seance or the Ouija board that you're going to for answers. All of these are exactly what Saul's doing in this story, trying a way of sidestepping what the Creator has already said and what he has already pronounced of the way things are, and thinking that we can somehow manipulate the Creator into doing things our way through the created order. And so that's kind of where we were Sunday, and this is not a new thing. So I want to reiterate some of the things we talked about. Yeah. So the one that I see that seems to be, I think, one of the most dangerous ones, and you will see on the stage of churches. You'll see this in small groups. You'll see it if you're not careful, and it will sound right, is manifestation. Yes. Everyone, I'm going to speak this into it. And in the New Age terminology, it's manifesting. Right? You see it all over TikTok. You see it all over Instagram, Facebook, manifesting. If you speak the right things, then they will have to come about. Again, you're going, you think as a finite person that you can move the infinite simply by what you say? Yeah. That's really an absurd statement. But what you see, especially in a lot of more Pentecostal, charismatic type background churches, is what has happened is there's this theology or doctrine called the little God theology, Whereas there's scriptures in the New Testament that those groups have mistakenly applied to themselves to say that we have become like little gods, that we share in the divine nature. Sharing in the divine nature does not make you a little god.
Right.
That's not what that scripture is saying. And so then what they do is, well, if I share in the divine nature, then I'm a little god, then I can speak things into existence, because that's what God did in Genesis chapter 1. God speaks things into existence. You are not God. You don't get to speak things into existence. So manifesting is nonsense. It's absolute nonsense.
Like, for me, I always go to, like, Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, right?
Yeah.
Like, he is both fully God and fully man. And yet, in that moment, he knows to pray, not my will be done, but yours. Like, he could have easily said whatever it was that he wanted to say in that moment, but he knew that was not the route to take.
So you'll see that really dangerous doctrine in the Christian church, and it is a New Age philosophy.
Yeah.
Like this whole idea that you can now listen. Is it good to speak things that are positive? Absolutely. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with speaking what's positive, speaking of hope.
Yeah, praying for healing.
Praying for those things. But to act as if you have some sort of given authority to speak into existence whatever it is that you want, because what if what you try to speak into existence is contrary to what God wants? Right? We don't ever think about that. We automatically think, well, if I share in the divine nature, then what I speak is ultimately going to be within, like, God won't let me speak outside of his will. God, no. This is craziness. So that's probably the one that I see the most dangerous for Christians. And I know it seems kind of benign.
Because I think it's like,
bad could it be?
Right. It's like, well, this is a good thing to pray for healing, but it's a different thing to say, like, to ask God to
Act
allow
as if you
healing.
have a right to it.
Yes.
That's what it is. Manifesting is entitlement at it, and that's why it's so popular in the world right now. Is manifesting is straight up entitlement to go, oh no. See, I can bring about whatever I want to bring about, and that's why it's so popular in our world, because we live in such a selfish, entitled world that's why it's taken off. But that's the one I think is so prevalent in the church that we've got to get rid of. But then I'm telling you, there are people in churches that dabble around with tarot cards, witchcraft, crystals, seances, and the like, all forbidden practices based on the theological stance of the Bible and Christianity as far as the sovereignty of God goes.
Yeah.
That's why those are outlawed. Sunday I had like a full page written about, because we were like 2 to 3 days after Halloween,
Right.
and I was like, I know already what's going to happen is as soon as I talk about this, they're going to go, well, wait a second, Pastor. We've heard you talk about Halloween in a positive light.
You all went trick-or-treating.
Yeah, you had your whole staff over at your house on Halloween night, went trick-or-treating. You have trunk or treat here at the church. You all went and served at a fall carnival at the local school. You talk about Harry Potter all the time. So are you changing your stance on these things, or are you a hypocrite? What is it? Well, here's where I think I got some messages, and I saw some people, they came up to me on Sunday, and they were like, oh, I love what you were saying about all that stuff. We don't do this, we don't do this, we don't do this, we don't do this. And I was like, oh, Lord, tune into the extra point, because I will say right now definitively the reason why that what we talked about on Sunday is not in conflict with Halloween is these are two totally separate categories.
Yeah.
You can just go Google, and again, we're going to post some links in the show notes of this to provide you even more information on this topic. So because I can't get into all of it on the extra point. This is going to be a longer extra point, but I can't. The video I watched last night was like 2 hours long. I'm not going to do 2 hours on why Halloween is not forbidden for Christians. But that's out there. It's out there if you want to find it. So first and foremost, when we start thinking, well, why does Southridge do a trunk or treat? Why does the pastor have people over for trick or treating and things like that? The argument against Christians being involved with Halloween is that we are told that Halloween is like a Christianized version of an old Celtic festival called Samhain.
Okay.
Samhain. The only problem, and you can listen. You can go to the video that I watched was debating a video by a guy named Isaiah Saldivar who went to History.com and pulled up the origins of Halloween. History.com says that it's Halloween came from an old Celtic festival called Samhain, which had to do with the dead and sacrifices and all this sort of stuff. The only problem when people say that, and this is where all of the conflict comes from, so we're going to settle it really quick. This is where all the conflict comes from, is that none of the early sources on Celtic festivals say any of that whatsoever. Nothing like that, like that it was tied to pagan rituals. None of that pops up until late into the 1500s and beyond. So it's not in the earliest sources. Like if you went and saw that History.com article that came out, there's not a single primary source that goes back to the Celtic writings or anything that relates Halloween to Samhain at all. What happened was somewhere in the Middle Ages, someone started to write things like that, and they just go, "Oh, well, yeah, that's where it came from." It's completely been proven to be false. Completely. They do this actually with all Christian, or not even really Christian, but all holidays. Like here in another month and a half, people will go, "Oh my gosh, don't celebrate Christmas. Don't you put up that Christmas tree. You know, that had to do with the fertility god, right?" It's like, gosh, no, it didn't whatsoever. That's nonsense. We'll put the information out there at Christmas time to help you. They say the same thing about Valentine's Day. They say the same thing about Easter. They're about to start saying the same thing about St. Patrick's Day. The problem with all of these claims is there is no documentation early on whatsoever. So there's I think it's a 10th century book or writing about Celtic festivals. 10th century. Samhain as a religious festival never shows up in that writing in the 10th century. And yet when we get writings in the 15th, 16th, 17th century, it starts saying that there was this satanic ritual called Samhain. It's like, well, wait a second. Why was it not in the 10th century document if that was a comprehensive, and it was a comprehensive list of all the pagan festivals and things, and that never showed up. So clearly it was a later addition to go, oh, so somebody starts grabbing bits and pieces and starts trying to put things together that was never actually put together. So my whole point, and if you want to go and look at all this, we're going to post, you can go do their own research, but I will tell you definitively there's absolutely zero proof that Halloween has anything to do with pagan origins or anything of the like. Zero evidence. Furthermore, when it comes to should Christians engage in Halloween or anything like that, furthermore, the thing that matters more than anything is always intent. Intent. Let's say a document gets unearthed through archaeology this year that dates to the 5th century that says Samhain was a pagan festival that had to do with death and all this. No, Samhain was a sort of festival, but from what we can tell, it was really they slaughtered a bunch of animals because it was right going into winter, and you couldn't take care of that many animals at that point because you can't grow food in the wintertime. So they would have a big feast, but it wasn't tied to satanic practices or anything like that. If you found a document that said Halloween got its origins from Samhain back, and you say it dates earlier than that 10th century or 11th century document. Okay, let's say that that's true, which it's 100% not. But even if it was, intent still matters. Because just because something has a pagan origin doesn't mean that God cannot redeem it for his own purposes. Hello, your own personal story. Right? Your own personal story had a pagan origin, and now God is redeeming you and doing something amazing with it. So even if it can be proven, which it absolutely cannot be, that Halloween had pagan origins, it still would not forbid someone participating in it if they are allowing God to redeem it for his kingdom purposes. That's why we do trunk or treat here. I don't ever go a year without getting. Actually, I don't think I got anything this year unless you count the questions that I invited for this week.
Yeah.
This is one of the first years I think that I haven't got an email from someone about why do we do Halloween? Don't you know it's pagan? I go, don't you know that it's not? And I'll send them the videos. My guess is they won't watch the video and they'll just go, well, somebody told me on the History Channel this came from. No, listen, it's nonsense. It's not out there. It doesn't exist. So, yes, trunk or treat, cool. Fall festival to help out a local school, cool. My family and all of our staff, we went trick-or-treating. Why? Because intent matters. My son dressed up as Squints from The Sandlot. I am almost as sure as you can possibly be that when he did that, he was not worshiping Satan. Right? He just wasn't. You can't go, oh, but what if Halloween had pagan origins, which it doesn't. But if it did, it still would not make my son a Satanist for dressing up like someone from his favorite baseball movie and going and getting free treats.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't whatsoever. Not to mention the fact that the history shows that trick-or-treating came from a Catholic background where they would go around and ask for prayers for people that were in purgatory. And then if you would do that, then they would give you like cakes and treats and things like that. So it actually came from a Catholic background, not pagan background. So there's just no good information out there to say, like they'll say stuff about jack-o'-lanterns. All of the stuff out there about jack-o'-lanterns being heaven, no, it's all nonsense. There's no primary sources that date back to say, yes, this is a pagan thing whatsoever. It's all people at one point, like especially back in the 80s, like Wiccanism came on the rise. They just attached all of this stuff without there being any primary documents to say that it was ever attached to witchcraft and stuff before that. So like you get modern Wiccans and Satanists. I was just driving down somewhere with a friend this weekend, and he is a former Satanist or a former Wiccan or something in his church. He says, "Oh, they say that they love when Christians celebrate Halloween because they don't know what they're messing with." I go, listen, they don't even know what they're messing with.
Right.
So just because a Satanist or a Wiccan says that Halloween is evil, that doesn't actually make it evil.
Right.
Because they still don't have the primary documents. They just started practices because someone told them along the way that this was true, but they don't have any of the primary documentation to prove that whatsoever.
Yeah.
Now, am I sitting here saying that every single part of Halloween is good? Absolutely not. Listen, my kid dressed up as Squints from The Sandlot. My daughter dressed up as Taylor Swift, and I don't really care what your opinion on that is.
Yeah.
But either way, neither one of those were satanic. Neither one of them were pagan or whatever you want to say. What about Taylor? Don't start with me on Taylor Swift. Okay. It's just not.
Yeah.
And so intent matters. But like what we don't do in our home, we don't dress our kids up as axe murderers.
Right.
I think that that's inherently wrong. We don't dress up as ghouls and goblins and anything of the sort. Now, our daughter was Hermione from Harry Potter a couple years ago. They go, I thought you said witchcraft was bad. Listen, witchcraft is bad, but watching Harry Potter is not engaging in witchcraft.
Right.
Any more than me watching a movie on baseball is me playing baseball. It's you watching a movie. And I don't understand the outcry from Christians in regards to Harry Potter, given the fact that the whole story is based on the premise that the lead character is despised and rejected by his own family, and to overcome the prince of darkness or the dark lord, he has to die and be resurrected by the resurrection stone to win the power over evil. It's like, good grief. I'm certain that you can see what the story is actually sharing.
Yep.
And first off, watching things doesn't mean that you are actually participating in them, just like a lot of y'all that watch church don't make you a Christian. Sorry.
Yep.
And second off, that story has the exact storyline of what Jesus did for every single one of us.
Right.
And it's funny to me that Christians will have an issue with something like Harry Potter because J.K. Rowling is not a Orthodox Christian, but have no issue with Lord of the Rings because Tolkien said that it was Christian allegory, or no issue with Narnia because Lewis was a Christian in writing Christian allegory. But they all there's a witch in Narnia, and Christians have no issue with that whatsoever. But they have an issue with Harry Potter, who also has the same storyline, where Aslan has to die, be resurrected to overcome the powers of evil, and it ultimately brings about the liberation of Narnia. It's the same stinking thing that happens in Harry Potter, just different. So I don't know why it is that we act so silly in regards to that. So intent really, really matters. Someone asked me last night about burning sage, and I've heard of people doing that. But I wanted to get the proper answer for her because I said, well, what is the purpose that, if it's not you, if it's someone that you know, why are they burning sage? Do they like the smell of it? Make the house smell nice? Okay. Again, intent matters. She goes, no, they've always heard that it warded off evil spirits. Boom. At that moment, the intent is to try to interfere with the supernatural through natural means. That is what is forbidden in regards to Christians and Jews alike, to be honest.
Yeah.
So burning things is not inherently wrong, but if you have the intent behind it that is somehow having some sort of supernatural effect on it, then you've now entered into idolatry, witchcraft, paganism, and this is not meant for us. So you should not have everything to do with Halloween, right? I think that there are costumes that I see kids wearing that I go, no, why would you do that? We don't just watch any and every movie in our home that comes on. Even though I'm not one of those people that's like, oh, you watch a horror movie, your house is going to get haunted. I think that's silliness.
Yeah.
There's just certain things I don't want in my head and in my heart. But there are some Halloween movies that we will watch. It's again, intent really matters, and realizing that watching something doesn't mean that you're participating in it whatsoever. It's just some pretty sound principles. And the crazy thing is, if people didn't lie in the first place about the origins of all of this, none of this would even be a thing. We would be able to go, you should not be doing tarot cards, Ouija boards, or any of these other practices in witchcraft or the New Age, and also go, there is clearly nothing wrong with my kid going around the neighborhood and being blessed by people with candy.
You're
then ultimately I'm blessed by it because I've been eating candy for a week now.
Yeah.
Right? There's just nothing. There's just nothing there.
Yeah.
So I know it seems like a little bit of a bait and switch because I think everybody thought, man, he's going to get on here and say no more Halloween, all this stuff. Because no, listen, it's all utter nonsense. When someone says that it came from pagan background because the spirit, the veil between the spirit world and the real world is open on that one, they don't even have good reason to believe that Samhain was actually on November the 1st, which Halloween's on the 31st, which is a conflict. It all got lined up with All Saints Day, which was when the Catholic Church wanted to venerate and honor certain deceased saints. And so the night before that was called All Hallows Eve. And they go, see, it had to do with the dead. Yeah, the dead saints, it was... And again, even if it had pagan roots, if the church redeems it for good, just like God redeemed your pagan self for good, then it still can be I mean, seriously, how many times in your life are you going to have people coming to your front door giving you an opportunity to bless them? How many times do you have that? Why would we sit on the sidelines? You know, it's like, you're going to go sit in the basement of your house with your lights off while your neighbors are all out and about, and you're going to go, yeah, we're going to show them the light of Jesus with our lights off. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen Christians engaged in. And honestly, we need to stop the nonsense. We do need to be careful of what we are involved in, but we need to stop the nonsense surrounding Halloween, even though I know this time next year we'll be having the same talk. Because these crazies will not go and look at the primary sources whatsoever. They will not get to the earliest documentation. And they will also not realize that just because something, if we found out tomorrow it did, it still doesn't mean that you cannot redeem it for good.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think it's important to remember, like, how when you're searching for an answer to really search for truth, like looking for the earliest documents, those types of things. Because as much as there is like information out there that can help you find the right answer, there's a lot of misinformation too.
Yeah.
And so I think that is something to remember and keep in mind as you come across things like this, to just, and if you don't know, like ask. I love that people do ask, because I think that's another opportunity to help teach and disciple people to know how to seek the truth, the full truth, and like how to look at these things and find the good in it and figure out how to redeem it for good. I think that is so important, because we saw like in Saul's story, the thing with him is that he continued to be disobedient. We weren't saying that there isn't grace for people in those moments when you do change, but Saul had refused again and again and again to change.
Over and over.
He was not changing, but he wanted God to change, even though he wasn't willing. And so that's the thing that I would say to remember, like at the end of this, that
that's a good word on research, though.
Yeah.
You can't just go to a website and be like, oh my goodness, it says history.com. They're
right.
Like, that doesn't make, like, look at the sources of the article that's being written.
Yeah.
And then go seek out those sources to see if they're actually primary sources. Because this is what happens a lot of times. This is even in like Christian apologetics. People write stuff about Christianity and things that are just outright false. Then they get circulated over and over. And what happens is this person will write a book, and this person will write a book, and this person will write a book. And then as their sources, they will simply use these other books that have been written on the fallacy to back up their claims.
Yeah.
And no one ever gets to the bottom of the fact that none of those who are all quoting each other and claiming they have sources, none of those are primary sources that actually go back far enough. They just start with someone's opinion, and then they just start quoting each other and go, see, this book says this, this book says this. And it's like, yeah, because they are all started from the same fallacy, the same bad information, and no one ever went back to the original documentation to find out if that's actually true or not. So, like, when you're doing your own research on these, please don't just go to Google and type in, what does the Bible say about Halloween? And then see every single blog post that's ever been posted that does not deal with the best information whatsoever to draw your conclusion about how you should feel. And that's for every single thing. You want to know how you should figure out how you feel about the end times and eschatology? Go to those sources. How you should feel about things going on in the New Testament? Go to the original sources. Please, do not be lazy. This is like today. We're filming this on Election Day. And most people today are going to cast a ballot in complete ignorance because they did not go to the original sources. They're going to say, oh, I know what Trump was all about. I know what Harris was all about. But they only ever heard information from people that said that this is what they said. They did not go and get the actual information about these people whatsoever to be fully informed. We do the same thing when it comes to any topic. If you don't get to the horse's mouth, right, to the actual source, you are being lazy and you will be misled.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one thing that I will say, like my science courses that I took taught me, because you had to really be careful of your sources, of where you went to for the information. And it's the same thing for anything in life. I think going to the right source is so important. And then remembering at the end of it, like just remembering how you tied it back to God and how he can redeem anything. Like remembering the key source of everything, like the creator of it all, and how he is sovereign over it all. And so even in those times where you get a little anxious or that type of stuff about it, remembering that God is still good, that God is still there, he's still present. So we'll be back here again next week with another episode of The Extra Point, where we're going to dive deeper into the next chapter of 1 Samuel.
Thanks for tuning in to The Extra Point. Be sure to subscribe to the Southridge Church podcast and tune in every Wednesday for another episode of The Extra Point.